Emily Carter had always imagined that her life in Seattle would feel bright, full of energy, and full of opportunities waiting around every corner. But that idea faded slowly as the months passed. Her small apartment, once a symbol of independence, now felt like a reminder of everything slipping out of her control. Bills covered the little kitchen table. Her mother's medical prescriptions were stacked beside them. And in the center of it all lay the one paper she couldn't ignore anymore, the overdue rent notice. The paper wasn't threatening, but the silence around it felt heavy. The month hadn't gone the way she expected. Her hours at the floral shop had been cut again. Her mother had needed extra treatments, and Emily had done everything she could to stay afloat. But life didn't pause just because she needed time to catch up. The rain outside hit her windows in a steady rhythm, louder than usual. The sound made her anxious, as if even the weather was knocking on her door, asking for answers she didn't have. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to calm the rush of panic. Then came an actual knock. Her heart jumped. She stood slowly, hoping it was anyone except who she feared. When she opened the door, her landlord, Daniel Hayes, stood there under the dim hallway light. Daniel was the kind of man people trusted easily. Mid-30s, clean-cut, .com voice, and a way of listening that made people feel seen. But Emily didn't want him to see her like this. Worried, embarrassed, unsure how to explain everything at once. "Emily," he said softly, "can we talk for a moment?" She felt her throat tighten, but nodded anyway. He stepped inside, shaking off a bit of rain from his jacket. He didn't look frustrated or angry, which surprised her. "I'm not here to pressure you," he began. "I know things get hard, but the building owner has been asking questions. I've been covering for you for a few weeks, but I can't do it much longer." Emily swallowed, her voice quiet. "I'm trying, Daniel. I promise I'm trying. I just need a little more time." He watched her closely, studying the stress written across her face, the tremble in her hands, and the exhaustion in her eyes. Then he looked at the table full of paperwork. "I know," he said. "That's why I wanted to come tonight. Not to warn you, but to give you something like a chance." She looked at him, unsure what he meant. "I have a few friends coming over tomorrow," he explained. "They're good people. They run small businesses, community projects, volunteer programs. I told them someone in the building needed some support finding temporary work. I didn't tell them your name, but they offered to meet you." Emily blinked, surprised. "You told them about me?" His voice was gentle. "Not your situation. Not your problems. I just said that someone here is trying their hardest and deserves help." She didn't expect kindness, especially not when she was late on rent. She wrapped her arms around herself without realizing it, trying to understand why he cared. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked quietly. Daniel hesitated for just a second. "Because you've never taken advantage of anyone. You've always been polite, responsible, and hardworking. And because you matter more than you think." Her breath caught for a moment. He wasn't saying it flirtatiously. It wasn't inappropriate. It was sincere, warm, and honest in a way that made something in her chest soften. She didn't know what to say. No one had told her she mattered in a long time. Daniel stepped closer but kept a respectful distance. "You don't have to impress anyone tomorrow. Just be yourself. Let them see the person I see." Emily nodded slowly. The idea of meeting his friends scared her, but the possibility of help gave her the first bit of hope she'd felt in weeks before he left. Daniel looked around her apartment as if trying to figure out how someone like her ended up struggling so much. Her home was small, but every corner carried a bit of her personality. Soft colors, half-finished floral arrangements, books with pressed flowers inside. "You have talent," he said, pausing near one of her dried rose displays. "More than you realize." She gave him a shy smile. "Thank you." He walked toward the door, but before he turned the handle, he glanced back at her, his voice quieter than before. "Tomorrow evening, 7. My friends really do want to help. Just be ready." She nodded. "I will." When he stepped out into the hallway, the soft echo of his footsteps faded slowly. Emily closed the door and leaned against it, feeling her heart race for reasons she couldn't completely understand. Yes, she was grateful. Yes, she was nervous. But there was something else too, a warmth that stayed with her long after Daniel left. She cleaned her table, put away the bills temporarily, and tried to breathe normally. She wasn't sure if his friends could really help, but Daniel believed they could. That meant something. And maybe, just maybe, tomorrow might not be as hopeless as today felt. Still, she couldn't ignore the look in Daniel's eyes when he talked about his friends. There had been something conflicted in it, almost protective, almost like he didn't want anyone else stepping too close into her life. Emily shook her head lightly. She didn't want to read too much into his expression. He was her landlord, nothing more. He was being kind because he was a good person. That was all. But the truth was simple. Daniel didn't have to help her. He didn't have to defend her to the building owner. He didn't have to bring people who might help her find steady work. He didn't have to care at all, yet he did. The rain outside grew heavier, pattering loudly against the windows. She wrapped herself in a blanket and sat by the small couch listening to the storm. The room felt different now. Not heavier, like before, but lighter. Almost hopeful. She tried to imagine what his friends were like. Business owners, community volunteers, people who could give her a chance to get back on her feet. But part of her wondered something else too. Why did Daniel seem almost hesitant when mentioning them? As if he didn't want someone else stepping into the role he was quietly taking. She sighed softly, telling herself to stop overthinking. She didn't need romance. She needed stability, work, security, a future that didn't feel shaky every time she opened her mailbox. Still, the warmth of his voice lingered in her thoughts. You matter more than you think. She hadn't heard words like that in years. Emily pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and looked at the clock. Tomorrow would come quickly. She needed to prepare herself not just for the meeting, but for the possibility of change. Real, positive change. Maybe she would finally get a chance to breathe. Maybe life wasn't finished giving her opportunities. And maybe, beneath all the stress and fear, something else had begun too, a connection she never saw coming. She didn't fully understand it yet. She didn't even know if Daniel understood it. But in the silence of the rainy night, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, warm, quiet, unexpected hope. And it all began with a single knock on her door. The morning sunlight spilled through Emily Carter's apartment windows, soft but insistent, as if nudging her toward the day ahead. She moved with quiet urgency, straightening cushions, wiping countertops, and making her tiny space feel welcoming. Today was the day Daniel's friends would arrive. And though she told herself it was just about practical help, a nervous flutter in her stomach betrayed the truth. She didn't just want to be ready for them. She wanted to leave an impression. Not a superficial one, but the kind that showed she was capable, responsible, and worthy of trust. Emily worked in silence, her thoughts racing faster than her hands. The flowers she arranged on her table were her small attempt to impress, though she didn't believe she needed to. Daniel's words from last night echoed, "Just be yourself. Let them see the person I see." The kindness and faith in his voice had lit something inside her she hadn't felt in months. Something delicate, almost tender, that made her heart beat uneven. She tried to push it aside. This was about survival first. Anything else was secondary by 7 in the evening. Emily's apartment smelled faintly of fresh flowers, a hint of baked bread, and the soft, lingering scent of rain. She smoothed her hair one last time, straightened her jacket, and waited. The knock came precisely on time. 3 soft raps that sounded almost musical against the door. Her heart jumped, and she opened it to find Daniel standing there, umbrella in hand. With 2 other people behind him, Daniel's friends smiled warmly. Their presence was immediate reassurance, carrying an air of ease that seemed to dissolve some of Emily's tension. The man, Michael, had a quick, friendly smile, the kind that made you feel instantly comfortable. The woman, Sarah, radiated calm confidence, her eyes observing carefully without judgment. Daniel introduced them gently, noting their work and why he thought they could be helpful to Emily. They stepped inside. Emily guided them to the small living room. She noticed Daniel linger near the doorway, his posture relaxed but alert, as if he were quietly guarding the space. There was no awkwardness, only a soft energy that made her feel both seen and safe. Michael spoke first, discussing small projects and job opportunities they thought might suit her skills. Sarah mentioned community events and volunteer work, noting how her experience with people could be valuable. Emily listened carefully, her nerves easing as practical solutions unfolded before her. While they spoke, Daniel mostly stayed quiet, observing her reactions, giving small, supportive nods, and occasionally smiling in a way that was encouraging yet intimate. Emily caught herself stealing glances at him, noticing subtle expressions, the warmth in his eyes, the slight tension in his jaw when he smiled too softly, the way he seemed to measure every word with care. She had always thought of him as kind and fair, but now she felt something deeper. His attention lingered on her, not in a superficial way, but with quiet care that made her heart feel unusually full. By the time the practical discussion ended, Emily felt a surge of gratitude she hadn't expected. They weren't here to judge her, to pressure her, or to question her life choices. They were here to offer help, to open doors she thought were closed. She realized she had been carrying a heavy weight of fear and embarrassment for too long, and now it felt as though someone had quietly lifted it, just enough for her to breathe freely. As Michael and Sarah prepared to leave, Daniel stepped forward. "Emily," he said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that made her stomach flutter, "you did great. I hope you see that this isn't just about work. It's about people believing in you." Emily felt her throat tighten. I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice unsteady but sincere. She wasn't used to being the recipient of genuine support. Most of her life had been about proving herself to survive, not about being recognized for her efforts. Daniel shook his head slightly, as if dismissing the need for words. "You don't have to say anything. Just trust that I mean it. You've been handling more than most people would, and I wanted to help." The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. It was quiet, unassuming, and yet it carried a weight she felt deep in her chest. There was no hidden agenda, no expectation beyond trust and honesty. Daniel wasn't just her landlord tonight, he was someone who had chosen to stand with her. Quietly and firmly. The room fell silent for a moment, save for the soft hum of rain lingering outside the windows. Emily realized she had been holding her breath without knowing it, and she exhaled slowly. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was intimate in a gentle way, like the pause between heartbeats. A space where unspoken feelings could exist without being forced into words. "Thank you," she whispered, finally finding the words she needed. "Not just for the help, but for believing in me." Daniel's lips curved into a small, almost shy smile. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said softly. "I did it because I couldn't just watch you struggle alone, and because I've cared about you for longer than I probably should." Emily's heart skipped. She wasn't sure if she should respond, whether she should step closer or keep her distance. The emotions in the room were quiet but undeniable. It wasn't a confession of romance in the traditional sense, but there was an honesty there that made her pulse quicken. She realized that her feelings for him were far more complex than admiration or gratitude. There was something tender, protective, and intimate in the way he looked at her, a depth she hadn't anticipated. For a moment, they simply stood there. Two people surrounded by the remnants of ordinary life, a small apartment, flowers on the table, rain streaking the windows, yet the space between them felt charged with unspoken words. Emily thought of all the lonely nights she had endured, all the times she had tried and failed to keep her life from collapsing. And here he was offering support without judgment, standing quietly with patience and care. "Tomorrow is a new beginning," Daniel said finally, his voice breaking the spell just enough to ground them both. "We'll figure everything out together, if you'll let me." Emily nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something unfamiliar but thrilling: anticipation. She wasn't sure what the future held, whether stability would finally arrive or whether new challenges would appear. But she felt ready to face them with him by her side. When Daniel finally stepped back into the hallway, the air between them held a softness that lingered after the door closed. Emily leaned against the door, her mind racing but calm in a strange way. She realized that help didn't always come from obvious places. And love, or the potential for it, didn't always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it arrived quietly, in subtle acts of trust, care, and patience. The apartment felt warmer now, not just because of the soft glow of the lamps or the faint smell of flowers, but because of the realization that she wasn't alone, that someone had noticed her struggle and had chosen to stand with her, that someone saw her, truly saw her, in a way that made her want to rise above fear, doubt, and worry. As she moved around her small kitchen, preparing a light tea for herself, Emily reflected on the evening. The practical help was important, of course. But the emotional support, the validation, the kindness, and the quiet care was what left the deepest mark. She realized that she had been so focused on survival that she had forgotten the importance of connection. And now, through Daniel's careful efforts, she felt a spark of hope and trust rekindled. By the time the rain slowed and the city lights outside began to shimmer against the wet streets, Emily sat back on her couch, sipping her tea, and thought about the possibilities ahead. Michael and Sarah had offered practical solutions, but Daniel had given her something more. A reminder that she was not invisible, that she was worthy of help, and that she could allow herself to feel hope again. Her heart ached with a quiet, thrilling emotion, a gentle stir of feelings she hadn't expected. Gratitude mingled with warmth. Trust mingled with longing. Daniel's presence in her life had shifted something subtle but significant. It wasn't a dramatic confession of love, but it was the beginning of something tender, delicate, and emotionally resonant. A connection that could grow, if nurtured, into something deep and meaningful. As night fell and the city quieted, Emily placed the empty cup on the table and smiled softly to herself. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, maybe a job, maybe more challenges. But she knew one thing, clearly, she didn't have to face it alone. Daniel's care, his quiet devotion, and the unexpected support of his friends had changed something fundamental in her life. It had reminded her of resilience, trust, and the small, vital sparks of human connection that could light even the darkest days. And as she finally climbed into bed, Emily's thoughts lingered on Daniel. She didn't fully understand the depth of her feelings yet. She didn't know if it was gratitude, affection, or the early stirrings of love. But she knew one undeniable truth. Her life had shifted in subtle, profound ways tonight. And in the stillness of her apartment, surrounded by quiet reminders of effort, courage, and care, Emily allowed herself to dream of a future where struggle didn't mean solitude, where hope could exist alongside uncertainty, and where the quiet, steadfast presence of one person could make all the difference. The night outside was still and calm. Emily closed her eyes, her heart both heavy with longing and light with possibility.